Hello everyone, this is Jotto, and welcome to the Druid section of the Goblins and Gnomes set review. Joining me once again is Mr. Dapperatchik.
Hi guys.
So we are going to be doing the classes in alphabetical order. So we're starting with Druid, finishing with Warrior. These are all going to be separate videos, and we will be starting with the Tree of Life, arguably one of the most expensive and overcosted spells they've ever made.
Yeah, well, Druid got completely shafted in this expansion, and Tree of Life is pretty much the worst card. Uh, yeah,
It's following the trend of epics, isn't it?
yeah. So it's kind of a cool spell. 9 mana. You get to restore all characters to full health. That's all minions and heroes. But the issue is that so it costs 9 mana. So you're not playing it before turn 9, and then you have to find some situation where it's turn 9 or later.
No, no, no. You
And
can play Wild Growth, and then you can play Grove Tenter and Innervate.
okay, you have to find some situation where you're kind of so close to death that healing yourself back up to full health and you play some big taunts and you manage to survive and stabilize and come back. But so you're far enough behind that that's worth it, but not so far behind that you still can't come back because you're so far behind on board because you've spent your turn 9 playing a spell and no minions. And just in general, it's massively inferior to more flexible healing options like Healing Touch because you can play a minion on the same turn, or Farseer or Antique Healbot, or Alex Strasser
It
even.
only really works with you have like Ancient of War on the board as well, and even then you have to skip your turn to do it. And
Yeah, and even
Alex
then,
Strasser
like,
just sounds better.
right, because you don't need. I mean, how much healing do you need? Do you really need to be at 30 instead of 15 if you're playing against a
Is the difference
hunter with
really
an
that
Ancient of War
large when
down?
you just put an 8/8 on the board?
Exactly.
And Alex
And Alex
Strasser can deal
Strasser,
damage.
you can also use on your opponent. You can, yeah. And even then, it's still bad. So, people don't play Alex Strasser ramp anymore. So, yeah, Tree of Life is just awful.
It's horrible. I mean,
Unfortunately,
it's not as bad as the thing it lost to in the voting process, though, by like 5 votes or something, which was
no,
Ancestress Call, which is equally as terrible, but not quite.
I think Tree of Life is worse than Ancestral Call.
Really?
Ancestral Call,
Although
yeah.
I
I
guess
mean,
we are debating arguably the worst cards in the set.
okay, right. The set of situations in which you would actually be glad that you had Ancestors Call is like significantly higher. Ancestors Call does something unique, but we'll get to that. We'll
We'll
get to
get
that.
there. Anyway, next card, Malorne. Malorne is a 7 mana 9/7 beast legendary with Death Rattle. Nothing. Sorry. Shuffles the minion back into your deck. I mean, personally, I think this Death Rattle says randomly buffs Undertaker and
Yeah.
randomly gets
Okay. So
damaged by Scry
um,
Purifier.
there's two advantages to why you'd want the minion shuffle back into your deck rather than it just dying. One is that you'd rather draw Malorne again than the average card in your deck, which in the late game is maybe true. So that's like a slight amount of value that the quality of the average card in your deck is slightly higher because it had that death rattle. Um, and secondly, if you go into fatigue, then you're going to be able to keep playing Malorne, and they're eventually going to run out of
Unless you're
cards.
playing as a priest
Unless you're
with
playing
mind
against a priest
control,
with
though,
mind
and
control.
then you lose immediately.
Um,
And if you're getting that late in the game as a druid, you're probably playing against priest.
yeah, exactly. Right. Priest is the only class where for druid it's quite common to get into fatigue wars anyway. So
Yeah.
Um, and right, so for those kind of minor benefits, which happen only in a small minority of cases, um, you have to play a 7 mana 9/7,
Which is
which
really
is
bad.
really awful because your 7 drop, you need it to kind of really affect the game in some way that isn't just getting played and then either they'd ignore it and kill you, or big game hunter it, or
It's not even that good
play
at
some removal that
value.
costs way
Like,
less than the lawn.
it doesn't do anything really. The shuffle effect
Yeah.
is a tiny upside, and
Con Consider that you could play Doctor Boom instead of this card,
consider you could
or
play double
Trogzor.
War Golem instead of Malorne, and it would do roughly the same thing.
Yeah, basically.
That's just depressing if you look at it that way, but it's actually pretty close to the truth. Like
So it's an
playing,
interesting.
it's an interesting mechanic, but it doesn't do anything. People are
Uh,
overhyping this by a massive amount.
yeah, I mean, the state that the metagame would have to be in for this card to be good, where
Is degenerate.
you know most games go to fatigue wars is just not the world that we live in.
Yeah, that's also not a version of Hearthstone that I would enjoy
So
playing.
um, uh, disenchant this card.
Make your Cenarius. Make his son. Disenchant your 4 Malorns. You never know. Maybe the effect works on packs as well. You disenchant your Malorns. They appear again. You get your Cenarius eventually.
Shuffle it back into your next pack.
Yeah. You get 200 dust, but you open it in every pack. Eventually, you get like 5. Basically, what you do at that point is you wait until you have 5 Malorns, and then you disenchant all of them, and then every single pack you get from now on has 5 Malorns in it.
What? Then you can get no other card but Malorne.
Yeah. I would take that personally, but it's
The new Druid class challenge is to a deck of 30 Malorns.
the funny thing is that it's like there are 2 things you want to be disenchanting Malon for: Cenarius, which is better, and Trogzor. Doesn't die to Big Game Hunter, better value, more game-changing effect, actually has an effect. Like
Yeah. So I mean, there are better 7-drops than this card.
way better 7-drops. All right, Recycle. One of my favorite cards from the set, although favorite does not necessarily mean best, as we saw with Hobgoblin. So, Recycle is a 6-mana spell for Druid, rare, shuffle an enemy minion into your opponent's deck. I love this card because it is hard removal. Don't play it as 2 ever though, because it is 6 mana, which is very slow.
Yeah, 6 mana is a lot to pay for a spell. Druid does lack hard removal, so this is a card that gives something that Druid couldn't do before. And a lot of the way that the current Druid decks are set up is kind of to play around the fact that they have hard removal because they know that they can't deal with more than a couple of big late game guys, so they have to basically win on turn 9 with the combo.
Yeah.
And so maybe Recycle will let you play a bit more kind of with a slower Druid. But in current Druid decks, which I think will probably continue to be the best way to play Druid, although it will be somewhat weaker since Druid didn't get much from the expansion. If that's the best way to play Druid, this card will not be played, probably, because 6 mana is way too much to pay for a spell. And yes, you kind of get to pseudo-silence their Sylvanas or their Cairn, send it back to their deck, doesn't get Death Rattle.
The upside is that it kills Sylvanas, it kills Cairn, things like that. First of all, just before anyone says anything, this is not a downside. It really isn't. That this is getting old, that every single thing... Like, it's the same thing with Malorne. Malorne's being hyped into oblivion right now because, oh no, it never goes away.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing in that it's a slight downside in that the average quality of their draws will be higher because you want to draw Sylvanas against a Druid more than you want to draw
0.1%.
Yeah, but it's a tiny difference. Like it would be better if it said silence and destroy, but not significantly so.
Not by much. Yeah.
So, but anyway, the main problem is that it just costs 6 mana.
Kel'Thuzad doesn't bring it back.
And so the great thing about hard removal, right? The reason that Execute and Shield Slam and Hex and Polymorph are such great cards is that it gets you a massive tempo advantage when you play it. So, they play their Cairn for 6 mana, and then you get to Hex it for 3 mana, and then you play more stuff, you get ahead. This costs basically as much mana as the stuff you want to remove with it. So you don't gain a huge advantage from recycling something. Recycling Sylvanas is not that much better than silencing it and killing it.
Apart from the fact that if they play the Sylvanas, then it means that you have a bigger board than they do.
Right. And so the question is not like, is it worth it, but do you gain enough from doing that?
The question is, are you recycling Sylvanases or are you recycling Ysera's? I think is the better question here. Because then you are getting pretty far ahead.
Yeah, but Ysera's not usually a problem for Druid anyway, because by the time it comes down...
they're pretty much dead. Yeah, it's just like... Yeah. The metagame has to be fairly slow for this to be good.
Yeah. Because not only does the value that you get from Recycle have to be enough to justify, like, spending 6 mana on it, you also have to justify all those games that you're going to lose to Zoo because you had Recycle in your hand that you never played.
True. It's about as good as Siphon Soul against Zoo. Being not very.
Yeah.
So, Recycle, it's an okay card. I'm happy it exists because Druid needed some sort of hard removal in some form, and eventually we'll see play when the metagame dictates it. In Arena, it's actually very good because you will play hard removal because you don't have
Yeah,
access to it. You'll pick it, you'll play it, you'll kill Boulder Fist Ogres and things like this, and things like that. Or Force Tanks. That's always good because you just can't kill them otherwise with Druid very efficiently.
I don't
But
think it's that great in arena. Like I wouldn't pick.
I
I would.
have
I
had it
wouldn't.
played against me once and it was really good. But
I wouldn't
I
pick it over like a premium rare like a Mech-Bear-Cat or
yeah,
Arctic
I
Monitor or
wouldn't pick it
Azure
over a
Draco.
premium rare, but it's like just below. Like I would pick it
Yeah, I
over
mean it
decent
gives you
cards.
something that you can't do, which is good.
Yep. All right, on to Dark Whispers, 6 mana, epic, which based on our current evaluation of epics is going to be terrible. Choose
And
one, summon 5 wisps because 6 was too many.
lo and
Or
behold,
give a minion +5/+5 and taunt. Can we just agree before we talk about the arena section that this is a terrible card in constructed, period?
yeah, in constructed, 5 wisps are just going to immediately die to AoE. And even if they don't, wow, you got five worth of stats for 6 mana. Good for you. Like, yes, you can combo it with Power of the Wild and then lose even harder to AoE, but
Like,
um,
yeah, it's.
yeah,
And the buff is a worse Mark of the Wild because it costs 6 mana.
yeah. So, like, the huge size of the buff is rarely going to be that relevant, and so because you don't need that much to like secure a favorable trade, and it costs 6 mana, which, as we were talking about when we were talking about recycle, that's a lot of mana to pay for a spell. It's a
And
lot of
this one
mana to have
doesn't
Dark
even
Whispers
kill a
stuck in your
threat.
hand,
You need something on the board as well to make this work.
right?
This is one of those Druid cards which has keyword, choose one, and only one.
Yeah, like Ancient of War.
Yeah, it is a bit like Ancient of
You
War,
will
where
only ever
it's
choose one.
yeah, you will only ever choose one of them. But yeah, I have played this in arena. It's been okay. It hasn't been fantastic, but when I have got the opportunity to play it, it's won me the game. But the problem is sometimes you don't get the opportunity to play it. It's kind of like it's
I
worse
mean,
than the Warlock one because that's also a removal spell and a buff,
yeah,
whereas this
buffs
doesn't
are
have
actually
removal.
like quite good in arena, but terrible in constructed.
Yeah, that's generally the way it goes because you can't take the tempo loss if they just use hard removal on it or something.
Yeah,
All right, on to Mech-Bear-Cat. 6 mana, 7/6. Mech with whenever this minion takes damage, add a spare part card to your hand. As you mentioned, this is a premium rare in Arena because it's basically a Boulder Fist Ogre that draws you spare parts. In Constructed,
yeah. I
however,
mean,
this is just a worse Toshly, right?
yeah. So the 7/6 size is not that great because it dies to Big Game Hunter, in which case you get no spare parts. Um, and 6 health is wait,
It's
it's not. So the stat
okay.
line is not as good as Boulder Fist Ogre. You could just play Toshly, which is a 5/7 and gets you at least one, probably 2 spare parts, which is like as good as the best case from Bearcat, basically.
And the mech is not
So
relevant because it's Druid, and anything above 4 mana when it comes to mech and Druid is not going to do anything because they don't have mech synergy apart from Mech Warper. They don't have any
yeah,
class card that does that.
and you could play Piloted Sky Golem over this card, and it'll probably be better.
I actually
Um,
think it would be better. Doesn't die to Big Game Hunter, has a more
yeah,
relevant effect. You only
it's
lose a
stickier,
little bit.
has Death Rattle.
Yeah, you only lose a little bit on the stats, and on the attack, it's actually advantageous for you, and it's sticky, and that's better in spare parts. So I would just play Piloted Sky Golem over this in Constructed. But in Arena, it's a very, very good card. Alright, on to Druid of the Fang. 5 mana 4/4. It's a common with Battle Cry. If you control a beast, transform this into a 7/7. When this was spoiled, I think me and almost everyone I talked to were just like, why is this here?
Yeah, but I
It's
mean,
so random.
it's interesting because they're trying to give druids an incentive to go at it from another angle and bring beasts, which were like previously a hunter-only thing, to another class, and it's kind of
I mean, the
interesting.
token for
And
the Druid of the Fang is down here, by the way. It is a snake.
yeah, it's only slightly less silly than the original art, which is not very intimidating at all. Um, but okay, so um, it's a 5 mana 7/7 in the best case scenario, which is pretty good. The dream is coin out Druid of the Claw, and it lives, and you get to play Druid of the
Druid of the
Fang as a
Claw is a beast
7/7.
now, by the way, for anyone who didn't catch the
Yeah,
memo there.
Um, is the fact that is the fact that you could sometimes play this guy as a 7/7 enough to make it worth not only playing it and taking the risk that it sometimes be a 4/4,
I think
but
the
also the
worst
fact
thing
that
is
you
you
have to
have to play it in your deck.
go
5 mana four
you have
fours are bad.
and you have to go out of your way to put some beasts in. So I mean, you could play the Haunted Creeper, which a lot of druids are already playing, and you could play Druid of the
You
Claw,
could
but
play the new
maybe that's
four
not
drop.
enough.
You need
Um,
6, I think.
Maybe you have to play the 4 mana 5/4, which is just awful compared to like a Piloted Shredder or Mechanical Yeti. And then you play your Druid of the Fang, and it gets big game hunted, and
Then it just feels
like
terrible.
so it's not awful, right? Because being able to play you would win some games with this card by just playing a 5 mana 7/7 and beating their face in. But the upside of getting a 5 mana 7/7 as opposed to say like a vanilla 4/7 like Fugan is not that huge. Um,
And
and
one of
the
them's
potential downside
reliable.
is very large. So this card is not quite good enough. Like, if all Druid cards were beasts, then maybe it would be good, but
Yeah, it's. I just can't see it. I mean, I saw some
it
people
doesn't offer a
picking.
good enough return on
I've
investment.
played against this in Arena about 5 times, and I've never seen the snake. Like, I had to actually check the token on Hearthstone to see what it looked like, because I've never seen it trigger. And
It traded once against me, and then I big game hunted it.
it's just funny, but I've got a feeling this kind of feels like a card that's in the wrong set. Like, next set, we're gonna get like a bunch of beast synergy cards for Druid, and there's gonna be one random 5 drop that is benefiting mechs or something random.
Yeah,
It's just
maybe.
like, oh, they were in the
So
wrong set. Okay. Hmm.
um,
It's
that's
just
interesting.
weird.
Yeah.
Alright. On to Grove Tender. 3 mana, 2/4, rare. Choose one. Give each player a mana crystal, or each player draws a card. Now, this it has a completely symmetrical effect, apart from the fact that Druid may be able to use the mana crystal better, or the card better.
Um,
I think it's
okay,
okay
so
in Arena, but
how symmetrical is the effect?
that's a
So
good question. That
you gain a
decides
full
this.
mana crystal. So you're the one that gets to use the extra mana first. But like one of the benefits of ramp, the main benefit of ramp, playing 2/2 drops on turn 2 is not nearly as good as playing a 4 drop on turn 2.
What I
Right?
will
That's
say, by the way, is that
um
if it didn't say choose one, if it only gave one or the other, I think this would be default bad, because you're going to want to switch which one you're choosing based on the decks you're playing against.
yeah, that's true. So okay, so Jotto, against what decks is it good to accelerate mana, and against what decks is it good for both players to have more cards?
So against aggro decks, as a 3 mana 2/4, it is better to give both players a mana crystal, because it means you can start playing your 5 drops to all aggro stops in Druid.
Yeah.
And it
Actually,
also
one of the
means your
interesting
3 mana 2/4 kills one of their guys that they play.
yeah, and
The draw card is better against control decks, because if you're running a mid-range deck, it means you can dig to your combo, and that's pretty much the only way you can win. And the card advantage for them will become apparent much later in the game, to the point when digging for cards earlier might be more important for you.
yeah, I mean it's good in the late game because you can draw the card straight away and then play your you know Ancient of Lore that you draw with it, and then get really far ahead. Um,
I'm not sure how bad this is, to be honest. Like, I actually think
and
it might be playable.
I'm not sure if
Depends.
like it's better than just a generically good 3 drop. Um,
It's so hard to evaluate this thing, is the problem.
right. So the point that I was trying to make about the mana acceleration is that it does give you a full mana crystal. So you get to use the mana first. If you play it on turn 4, you can hero power. Um, if you play it on a later turn, you can play another minion. Um, but your opponent gets to use their mana to play ahead of their curve first.
Yeah.
So you play this card, and then they get to play a 5 drop before your 5 drop. Um, or yeah, so then they gain a big advantage from that. And it's not clear that like against aggro, like you get to rampage your threats faster, but they also get to play their cards out of their hand faster. And
Yeah, but it
rushing
does
down.
make Doomguard worse because they can only maximum play like one extra card probably, and you get your taunts down to weaken his board a bit before he can play Doomguard without discarding most of his hand.
That's a good point. And additionally, one of the problems that ramp druids have is that you want to stack a deck with as much late game guys as possible because that's what you want when you get the wild growth.
There's only
When you
two
don't get the wild
goblins.
growth, then you have the problem that you're completely screwed. Um, but here, because you have like the more reliable ramp, you know that you're going to be able to play late game faster. You can build your deck with more late game in mind. Um,
Because it may be symmetrical, but if your mid to late game is better than theirs, it suddenly becomes less symmetrical because you're accelerating more into the part of the game where you're advantaged.
right. And the other thing to know about this card is that Druid is one of the classes where there's like a potentially viable mill deck that you could make out of it because of Naturalize.
They get to draw a card as well.
And Grove Tender is like a better Cold Light Oracle in that respect.
That's actually a really good point. Like, if there's a mill deck, Grove Tenter is going to be part of it because you draw a card and then they draw a card, which is actually good for you because you want to naturalize and mill a bunch.
But there's the very large caveat there if there's a mill deck, which I still think that the pieces aren't quite there.
It'll happen eventually, but this is like looking into the future as far as this is concerned.
So, overall verdict from Grove Tender, it does some interesting stuff, but it's kind of an awkward card. It might not be good enough for constructed when you can play things like Spider Tank or Shade of Naxxramas.
In Arena, I'd say this is actually really good because even if it always draws a card, you're basically at parity when you both draw a card, and a 3-mana 2/4 vanilla is pretty good. And if you have a bunch of 5-drops in your hand, you can ramp so that you don't like miss turn 4 or something.
Yeah, and actually it's a problem that Druids have, that they play a lot of good 5-drops, and maybe the only thing they want to play on turn 4 is a Yeti if there's no good keeper target.
Yeah, exactly. Like, actually, fair point is that the drawback is that both of you get it. However, you do still get your 2/4. Like, that's still
well, you get your 3-mana 2/4, which is like not really an advantage.
It's not. Yeah, it's not an advantage. But the point is, if you can in constructed, obviously you're gonna have to figure out whether or not you can use this effect better than your opponent. In arena, though, if it's symmetrical, 3-mana 2/4 is fine. In constructed, we shall have to see. It is actually quite good against Zoo, though. Yeah, I will say it is good against Zoo because you get to ramp into your aggro stops faster than they do. And it also means you can go, if you're going second, you can actually go coin Grove Tender into Keeper next turn, and then just kill 3 guys before you have to play your taunts. Because 2/4 will actually kill a decent amount of stuff in Zoo. That's one of the reasons Keeper is so good against that deck.
Yeah, that's true. They play a Knife Juggler and you innovate Keeper and win.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas, like, if you don't have Innervate, you now have kind of a second way of accelerating your Keeper without just kind of screwing yourself with Wild Growth.
And 2/4s are a bit better against Zoo now because Soulfire has been nerfed.
Yeah, like if they have Soulfire, that's pretty bad for them.
If they still play Soulfire.
I think you still will have to. Although, actually, no, they get an extra mana crystal, so they can Soulfire.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. It's actually really difficult to judge how good Soulfire is now. I haven't played enough because the thing is, everyone's been playing Arena, so I haven't really played enough Constructed.
I haven't played this in Arena. I've only drafted Druid once, and I didn't get the option to pick Grove Tender. So
but, I mean,
can't really
on the
evaluate
Soulfire
it.
point, like I haven't really had a chance to test. Like, is Soulfire still good? Because
I haven't been playing Constructed at all
everyone's
either.
been playing Arena. Okay. Anyway.
So, Grove Tender, probably the card you can talk about the most as far as Druid is concerned. Now, onto the last Druid card, and arguably the best one. Probably the best one.
Definitely the best one.
Yeah.
That's not saying a lot.
2 mana, 2/2 Mech, Anodized Robo Cub, Taunt. Choose 1/+1 attack, +1 health. I just want to point out, when this was spoiled, it was mistranslated, and it was Anodized Robo Teddy. Which means I will be forever calling this the teddy bear. The other thing is that the plus health mode is called tank mode.
Really?
Yeah, I checked. I don't know what the attack mode is called, but the I randomly got it in Arena and I picked tank mode, and
it's like what the buff is called.
Yeah, it's what the buff is called. It's called tank mode.
Oh, that's brilliant. Okay, so this card is so either you play it as a 2/3 or a 3/2, and that flexibility is quite useful. So if they play a Leper Gnome, then you can play a 2/3. If they play a Void Walker or a Northshire Cleric, then you can play a 3/2. Um, so
This
that
is probably
flexibility,
going to be a 2/3 most of the time.
yeah, it's probably going to be a 2/3 most of the time, but against some classes, you'll definitely want to play it as a 3/2.
Yeah.
And that flexibility is good.
Very good with Mech
It's a good
Walker.
quality on a 2-drop. And the taunt means that in the late game it won't be completely useless. But the real question is whether, and it's a mech, so if for some reason you're not playing mech and druid, you can have that synergy there. It
There's a
opens up.
couple reasons you could play Mech and Druid. The first one is like you have Swipe and Wrath and Keeper of the Grove, along with Innervate, and with Innervate you can do some rather disgusting things with Mech.
Yeah, you can dump your entire
The
hand really
reason to
fast.
play Mech Druid is actually Anodized Robo Cub is the only Mech in Druid that actually is worth playing. But the reason to play Mech Druid is really the removal spells they get and the Ancient Allure and like the Draw Engine they get later on.
Yeah, I mean
Not
you
so
could play
much
mech
the
and druid
mechs.
because druid doesn't have that many great because druid you want to play a really minion heavy deck,
Yeah,
and druid doesn't have that many great minions to play a minion heavy deck. It doesn't have enough, so you can fill that out with mechs.
that's true.
And also, I'm just kind of coming up with this off the top of my head, but so there have been attempts at making an aggro druid deck because you have spells like naturalize that give you loads of tempo and savage roar to push through damage and innovate to
Just do
accelerate you really fast.
disgusting
But
things.
the problem with that deck is that it's just not you don't have a draw power to sustain
Jeeves.
playing loads of stuff within. Yeah, and if you're playing a bunch of mechs and innovating out mech whoopers and throwing loads of stuff onto the table, then you can follow up with Jeeves and refill your hand,
I'm
and
pretty
that might
sure
be
you can
amazing.
empty your entire hand by turn 4 playing with Innervates.
Yeah, if your curve is low enough. So that's definitely a possibility. However, so the real question with Anodized Robo Cub is, so suppose you're in your standard Druid deck, which is just you have a solid curve of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 combo, um, with maybe a wild growth in there. Do you want to play this over like a haunted creeper?
I think
Which
if it
because
wasn't before the rest, just interrupt you, before the rest of the spoilers came out, like on Monday, I would have said no. But with the amount of 2/3s running around, I think the answer
yeah.
might be yes.
Well, I mean, the beautiful thing about like say haunted creeper compared to this card is haunted creeper basically means that you can't get behind in the early game. You can't like really badly lose value, whereas the Robocub can, for example, get axed,
Yeah.
which is disastrous. Um, and it's also not as good in the late game because it's easier to remove to play around the threat of combo. And so there's lots of reasons why you might prefer other 2-drops. But it's still like a reasonable card. You might see it. It might not be quite good enough,
The
but
problem with Haunted
it's certainly
Creeper
solid.
is that it's worse against 2/3s and 3/2s, like by a significant margin.
Well, not really. It just sits there and they can't attack it, and then eventually it gets some good damage in.
Eventually, but the point is like you can't just trade into a thing and then they can't really do anything about losing their 3/2.
This is true.
So like 2/3s are much better against Haunted Creeper than 3/2s because you can't guarantee almost guaranteed kill over 2 turns for basically additional value on your end. Anodized Robo Cub, I do see what you mean about the losing tempo thing. I'm just a bit worried from Druid's perspective. Like, it's a bit risky only having one way of actually dealing with like us like early aggro and Wrath. You may have to hit
Yeah.
it a little harder.
So yeah, Druid's huge issue is that they can't really deal with Undertaker, and that's why they have a terrible matchup against Undertaker decks.
Unless
Almost.
they're running like a lot of aggro stops, and then it becomes okay. But then it's still a little sketchy on turn 1 or 2.
Yeah, I mean you can easily just lose if the Hunter plays or Zoo plays an Undertaker. And the new set there's Mech-Bear-Cat, which is just as bad.
It's actually
Although
worse 'cause
less.
you can't just keeper it.
No, I mean it's a bit better to Wrath, which is good. But yeah, overall, looking at the Druid as a whole, I think Goblins versus Gnomes have made Druid quite a bit weaker.
They got 3 cards, 2 of which are rares that are situationally maybe playable.
Yeah, I don't think any of these cards will actually make the cut in Druid, which is a bit sad.
In the current Druid, no. Like, Anodized
Um,
Robo Cub will go in its mech, weird aggro decks. Grove Tender, I don't think so. Obviously, we're going to test it, we're going to test everything, but I don't think so. And Recycle is in the same boat as Grove Tender, in my opinion.
and some of the neutral cards might be good in Druid.
Maybe.
Um, I mean,
Well,
they're going to
we'll see.
play
They got.
solid on curve minions
We
like
did talk about the 6 drops that they can use better than most, like Trogzor.
and Piloted Shredder and Spider Tank are just the generally good like on curve neutral minions. Um,
I think
but
Druid may have got the least out of this. Actually, no. I think Warlock may have got the least out of this, but Druid is a close second.
yeah, this is true.
Close to the worst legendary in the set. There's a couple really bad ones. Class legendaries in the set. There's a couple bad ones. There's Flame Leviathan and there's Bolivar, which I think is pretty bad. But Malorne is close.
Yeah.
A little too close.
So,
So that's pretty much it as far as the Druid is concerned. So anyway, thanks for watching the Druid section of the set review. We will be back with the next class, so stay tuned, and I'll put all of these videos in a playlist so that you don't have to get lost while trying to find them. So anyway, see you guys next time.